My full name is Rachel Weaver Kreider. I was born May 28, 1909. So now I'm 103, a little past that. Well, I lived in Goshen for 2 years. Then I lived in LaGrange County in what is an extinct village now with the name Peshan, but it was a farm home. I lived there for 8 years. And then we moved over to the Goshen area, and my farm buildings where I grew up are where the present Walmart store is on the way on Road 33 on the way to Benton. And in those days, the road was a narrow red brick road, and we had maple trees along our property. And you can imagine what a change that is now with the Walmart complex there. There isn't one thing to remind me of the days when I lived there. Oh, Grandpa Weavers lived with us. And I remember that when I discovered that Grandma wouldn't live to be 100, how I cried and cried, because the idea that Grandma would ever not live on surprised me. And another surprise I had was that she talked about her grandma. And I found out, well, she had a grandma, and that grandma had a grandma. I was just amazed. That was mind-boggling. She was very sharp in her thinking, and she, when she was younger, could add up a bill in her mind before the clerk could get it done on paper. Grandpa was entirely different. I've often wondered, how could those two people get together? She was more studious, and her people were completely different, very religious. Grandpa's religion rested on him rather lightly. And my parents, well, my mother didn't have a chance in her girlhood to get the education she wanted, and she was regretting it. It's a story in itself, how it happened that she gave up trying to finish the 8th grade. When she lacked the formal education she wanted, she managed to get it otherwise. And she and my father were an interesting pair. He decided that he would finish his college education. Well, that was so unheard of in that neighborhood, that a man that was as intelligent as they thought Sam Weaver was, that he would sell a farm to go to school. Now, my mother was right with him on that, and they were unusual in the neighborhood. Some of the Amish and other people stood around at the sale, shaking their heads that anybody should do such a foolish thing. But my father and mother did that, moved to Goshen, and went through interesting things in order to get that college degree completed. He was, of course, very much the head of the house, because that's the way the community was organized. That was natural. And she was not at all feeling submissive, but she was. And as I look back now, I see things about it all that I wasn't aware of at the time. They were rather strict parents, but good parents. And I realize now how the discipline that they imposed on us, which bothered me at the time, I now look back on it and I have a good impression of my parents. As a freshman at Goshen College, we had orientation classes, and in that class, the discussion of Latin came up. I had a Latin teacher at Goshen High School that was unusually good. She was dean of students, and she took an interest in me. She called me a hard little bud that opened up later. She laughed about it when we were grown up, so you can imagine, well, what did she mean? But anyway, she influenced me very much, and I knew I wanted to be a Latin teacher. And I was all for Latin. I really did learn very much through Latin, and the ancient history and so on. I soaked it up because it was an opening that I hadn't had before. So when this orientation class, a young man got up and had a poor excuse using Latin as one of the things to prove his point. I couldn't allow that. I answered at once, right in class, very vigorously, defending Latin. I noticed him, but they didn't pay much attention to that upstart. Later, in English class, the professor kept exchanging papers instead of grading them himself. He would exchange papers. Well, I, several times, got the papers of this young man, and he had such good ideas. His themes were very good, but his punctuation was poor. And I marked the paper up so red, and I thought, now this is not very good. And when he came over for his paper, I started to apologize that I had such red marks all over it. Oh, that's all right, he said. He gathered it up, and the way he looked at me, I saw, oh, that face was very interesting. He had blue eyes, and I noticed him. Well, circumstances crossed our paths. Neither one of us was popular. I don't know how we found each other, but we began to find each other. I was dating somebody else at the time, and I didn't realize until my children reminded me later that he didn't give up. He decided that when we were debating, he was on the men's team and I was on the women's team. The men were defeated, and the men were decided the women must not lose. So he took time out to help, and he felt that Rachel Weaver really needed a lot of help. And so we got to know each other quite well. And through that debate, I think, my daughter wrote it up that he persisted until the other fella bailed away. And we left school, college, engaged, but the Depression was on, and we had no idea when we'd get together. He went on to graduate school. I went on to teach school. We had no idea when we'd be together, but we knew by that time we'd wait for each other, whatever. That's how I met him. We had 3 children. They were born while we were living at Bethel College, which was a village made up of the campus, really. And it was an ideal place to raise little children. The oldest child we had was a boy. Then we had a little girl 2 years later. We named her Anna. And she was a smart little thing. She could memorize so well. Sarah was our youngest one. She was born 3 years after Anna. She was more all around. She had some artistic qualities, and she could sing, and she could do well in school. Now I have lost both daughters, and I grieve for them. The son is left. He's retired now and lives in Virginia. He taught economics for a number of years at Beloit College. He's a very good son, but I grieve, of course, for these daughters who have changed life for me completely with their death. Now, we come from a religious family and really a religious background. I don't know whether I fit the labels of a lot of religious people, but I think that I have been conditioned and think in those terms and received my notions of morality and of reality. I think all those things have come to me through religious thought and background. So I think perhaps that made me about as important as anything in my life. How do I answer about stress? I think I didn't learn how to handle stress, if ever. It would be in my late years when I have no responsibilities anymore, because I was apt to take things very seriously, especially things I was expected to do. There are two things especially that I'm sorry for, that I was so slow in realizing. And one of them is this idea of handling stress, and the other one is that I never have been as observant of details as I should have been. Even as a child, I often was in the middle of something and was so occupied with something that I didn't notice what was around me. And it shows in a number of different ways. When something was right around me and I wasn't aware of it, or I didn't know when clothes would fit, or I didn't know what people were wearing. Not that it made any difference to me, but there was a certain lack of keen observation that I never really developed as I wish I had. That when I was growing up, the Big Depression made such an impression on us that money was important, and we would think about what something costs. And now the young people, it seems to me, put so much ahead of money, status, convenience, a number of things like that. Money isn't important. They have money. They don't think about, to me, it seems as if they don't think about what it's like if you didn't have any money, because they seem to have had all the money that they want, and they don't seem to save. And we old folks get teased for saving this or that or the other thing, because we had to, but they don't seem to have to. I notice that difference, but I don't know whether it's more apparent than real. Oh, I have no advice for future generations, because it seems to me that so much advice that people give for the future is rather futile. And just to show how grandparents feel about their grandchildren, wondering whether they're being brought up, or whether they're disciplined, whether they understand. Well, that's evident right there. Be very wary about trying to give advice to the future generations.